What's up, everybody? Glad you guys are in here with us tonight. Bible Basics. Everybody's trickling on in. Glad to see y'all. Getting this camera all set. There we go. Welcome into another session of our Bible Basics class. And we're going to have fun tonight. As you guys trickle in, make sure you swipe to the right, click share, send this out to all your friends and followers. We want to send this out to the world, get Bible study trending, let everybody know that we are studying the Word of God. Of course, make sure you send up those hearts. The Periscope currency is the hearts. So we want to fill the room up with hearts to let everybody know. Of course, let me know where you're watching from. If you're a member of New Psalmist, go ahead and let me know. Let me know where in Baltimore you're watching from. If you're a member of another church, let me know what church you're from. Give you a shout out. Richmond, Virginia. Amen. I'm going to give you a shout out as we have fun in Bible study tonight. New Orleans. Alrighty. Welcome on from the Big Easy. MPBC here. Alrighty. We got New Psalmists in the house. Got to have New Psalmists in the house. Raleigh, North Carolina. Another North Carolina. We got North Carolina in the house. Mobile, Alabama. Vicky from Columbia, Maryland. Zen from New Psalmist. East Side. All right. Kingdom Impact, Macon, Georgia. Okay. Ellicott City. Mount Airy, Pittsburgh, where Dr. William Curtis is the pastor. Greater Mount Calvary Church. Alrighty, Pikesville, hey Casey. Chicago, Illinois. All right, Sarasota, Florida. Laurel, Maryland. Atlanta, Georgia. Owens Mills. We got somebody from New Smyrna Beach, Florida. All righty, down there on the beach. Hopefully it's a little warmer down there than it is up here in Baltimore. Hey, what's up, D? From New Psalms. Another person from Illinois. Somebody else from Atlanta. Another Laurel, Raleigh, Dallas, Texas. All righty, Pikesville. Glad you guys are joining in with us. Make sure, Marietta, Georgia, okay. Make sure you guys swipe to the right and click share so that you can send this out to all your followers and everybody who follows you on Periscope, as well as Twitter, as well as Facebook. We want to let the world know. Deliverance Temple, all righty. Laurel, Massachusetts. Parkville, okay. And we want to let the world know that we are in Bible study, get this trending. With all the other stuff that's on social media, we want people to know that there are some people who are following Jesus Christ. Amen. From Maryland, from First Baptized and Church at Highland Park. All right. Charlotte, North Carolina. We want to let the world know that there are some people using social media to learn more about Jesus Christ and to grow in their faith. You know, there's so much crazy stuff on these social medias, but we're so glad that God allows us to use this tool so that we can spread the message of Jesus Christ to so many people across the world. We got some from Iowa. All righty. I know it's been a crazy couple of months in Iowa. The Iowa caucuses just took place this past Monday. So I know you're glad all that stuff is over and life can go back to a little bit normal out there in Iowa. Yes, Lord. It's, you know, I hope you've been paying attention to all that's going on. You know, it's a lot happening. It's important that you pay attention so you know what happens in our nation, because it's not enough just to look at it but not know. But you got to make sure you are playing attention to it, because it will have an impact on each and every one of us. So, of course, as we continue to go along, make sure you guys are swiping to the right if you come on. If you don't follow me currently, swipe right to the right, even right now, and click on my picture. Right on it says Joshua Thomas, M-I-N-J Thomas. Click on my picture, and I want you to click follow. If you're not following me, I want you to follow me to make sure you get updates for whenever we go live, so that you know without a doubt you get the update right on your phone, get the alert for when we go live each and every week for our Bible Basics class, as well as our other times throughout the week. I'll pop up on Periscope, just let you know what's happening. It's been so much going on at New Psalmist and here in Baltimore. You know, we were snowed in last week. Snow covered the earth. Oh yeah, send up the hearts. Thanks, Walt. So make sure you guys send up the hearts. We want to have a mushroom cloud of those hearts going up. Over the last week, you know, Baltimore was covered in snow, and now we are back out and rolling, getting back up, doing everything. This past Friday, we had a great time in the prayer encounter at New Psalmist. If anybody's on Periscope today that was in the prayer encounter, just send up the emoji with your hand up. I want to see who. Oh, thank you, Shelby. Happy birthday. Yes, last Friday was my birthday. The prayer encounter was my birthday, and on Friday we had our prayer encounter, and we had 2 millennial sessions during the prayer encounter, and they were fantastic. We talked about a little bit of everything. We talked about accepting God's plan for your life. We talked about dreaming big dreams. We talked about dealing with financial troubles that you face. We talked about relationships. We had a lot of different perspectives in the room on relationships. You had to be there to really know what was going on. We talked about a whole lot. We talked about the wills of God and all the things that God takes us through to get us to where he wants us to be, and really accepting what it is that God has for our lives. We found that, and especially for millennials, it's difficult to really accept what God has for us and walk into the calling that God has on our lives. So we must learn how to cultivate our prayer life so that we have constant communication with God, so we can grow and become comfortable in being who it is that God has called us to be. Because if you don't know how to pray and don't know how to talk to God, you won't ever feel comfortable doing what God called you to do, because you won't have a strong relationship with him. But if you build your relationship up by praying, then when the time comes for you to step into that new thing that he has in store for you, you are able to step confidently knowing that the God with whom you have a strong relationship will be there with you through no matter what comes your way. So we're going to be doing some more sessions. We found that we had so much fun. We learned so much on this past week in the prayer encounter with our millennial sessions. We're going to be doing some more sessions, most likely in the month of March or April. We're going to do a Friday night session. There's a poll currently up in our Facebook page. I'm going to go to the Facebook page right now because I want to read the results so far to the poll. Of course, if you're not following the Facebook page, you can click right. If you swipe to the right, click on my picture. In my bio, you will see a Facebook link. Click right on that Facebook link and request to join our group. But we have a poll going on saying what we want the next topic to be in our next session. And relationships is up over more than half, has more than half the votes. The options are relationships, spiritual direction, finding God's voice, accepting God's plan, prayer, and career development. And so far, relationships is the leader. So I encourage you that if you are looking for a session to come on out and learn more about what God has for you, go to the Facebook page, vote for what you want the topic to be. And whatever topic has the most votes by the end of this month, the end of February, that will be the topic we talk about in our next session. So make sure you get your vote cast so we can have an impactful session and really begin to meet the needs that the millennials have at New Psalmist and even in Baltimore. So we'll go ahead and get rolling. I'm going to jump right into the lesson today. You guys know all the logistics. Follow me, MINJ Thomas, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Periscope, everywhere, MINJ Thomas. And as you tweet and talk about the Bible study, make sure you use hashtag Bible Basics. That's hashtag Bible Basics, basics with an S. If you share this Periscope, or if you have your Periscope automatically linked on Instagram, currently the poll is only on Facebook. So you got to be on Facebook to vote right now. So if you swipe to the right and share this, it'll automatically share it with that hashtag. But make sure you use hashtag Bible Basics so that we can get the world trending on this Bible study. And of course, the Bible studies will all be cataloged right in YouTube, so you can go there and watch any of them from our start, when we started off with the book of Genesis all the way down to where we are in the book of 1 Kings. So, last week, we finished up with the books of Samuel, and we concluded with King David's life. We talked about all the great things David did, and last week we paid specific attention to the last section of David's life after he had an affair with Bathsheba and brought in some tragedy to his house, and how his children were constantly fighting there. Amnon raped Tamar. Tamar was raped by her brother, Amnon. Then Absalom, who was Tamar's brother, killed Amnon. Absalom went away, came back, tried to take over the throne. David had to run. Then he came back, was able to recover, was able to get back his throne. And David, after 2 of his sons have died, his daughter has been disgraced, now is sitting on the throne again at the end of his life. He goes out to battle. His warriors tell him, his leaders tell him, "You're too old to fight." They send him back home. And David now, the great warrior, has come to the conclusion of his life. And now we pick up, that's the end of 2 Samuel. And now we jump right into the book of 1 Kings. As you guys remember, we are traveling through the books of history. The books of history for the understanding in our Bible study are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. These are the books of history. And we are now into the books of Kings, 1 and 2 Kings. As we saw with 1 and 2 Samuel, they were intended originally to be one continuous volume. As I shared with you, the only reason they were split up was because the scrolls just were not big enough to carry the entirety of all that we find in 1st and 2nd Samuel. That's why they were split. So that's why, same thing with 1st and 2nd Kings. We're going to look at it as a continuous volume, as 1st Kings ends and 2nd King picks right up on the heels of it. So we're going to look at this as one continuous volume as in our studies. So you'll hear me talk about the books of Kings. That's 1st and 2nd Kings. If there's a specific story or specific reference I want you to go to, I'll make sure I specify 1st Kings or 2nd Kings for our understanding. As you guys, many of you may remember, when we began our study through the books of history, I told you about two of the authors, the compilers of these books. We find first the Deuteronomic historian that has been traditionally ascribed to being the author and compiler of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. And now we are at the end, this 1st and 2nd Kings, of the end of the Deuteronomic history that were ascribed to the Deuteronomic historian. The chronicler is ascribed 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah. So we will get to that after we finish through Kings. Baby sleep. Thank God she went to bed at like 7:42, like 7:42 on the dot. Put in the crib. She cried for a little bit, then she was out. So I'm shouting for that because I had time to come down, get myself together so I could jump on with you guys. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The scene is set for 1st Kings. Excuse me. The scene is set for 1st Kings, and we have now traveled throughout the duration of David's life, and we are at the end of his journey. And 1st Kings opens up, and the big question on the board, there you go. I'd like you guys keep on sending up those hearts as we keep on going. Just as I'm talking, just keep tapping the screen. We want to set a record today for the most hearts in Bible study. So as we begin the books of Kings, the question now arises, who will take over after David dies? David's at the end of his journey. It's clear that his best days are behind him. And now the question is, who is going to take over for King David? So, of course, we have told you, two of his sons, his two eldest sons, are dead. Amnon was killed by Absalom. Absalom tried to take over the kingdom, and Absalom was killed in battle by Joab. So both of his oldest sons are dead. So next we have a son by the name of Adonijah. Adonijah is the one, as David is old, he decides, he has the backing of Joab, who was David's commander. He decides to go on and become the king. He's not installed as king by his father, but he decides that he's going to step up to the throne as the eldest remaining son and lay his claim to as king, following in the footsteps, following in the line of succession behind his father David. Adonijah begins to walk around like he's king, and he has Joab with him. But there's another son by the name of Solomon that David has. You guys will remember, Solomon's mother is Bathsheba, the woman whom David had an affair with, got her pregnant while she was married, then married her, and the first child died, but God blessed it, and she was able to conceive another child. That child's name was Solomon. Solomon is the other son that we have in this story. We see this right at the beginning of 1st Kings. And Bathsheba goes to David, lets David know all that's happening, how Adonijah is trying to take over the kingdom, and how he promised and said, you have to make Solomon the king. Nathan, the prophet, the one who rebuked David when he did wrong, is also on team Solomon. So David says, okay, well, if this is how it's going to be, this is what y'all want, then yes, Solomon's going to be the king. So David installs Solomon as the king to follow in his footsteps and to be his successor. So he installs Solomon. You can go back and read through beginning with 1st Kings right on through. I'm not going to go too deep into this story because I will make sure we get into Solomon's life. So read through the back and forth, all that took place. And David, as on one of his last words, he gives Solomon a charge to be strong and courageous as he is the next king of Israel. He encourages him to stay strong in the way of the Lord, to continue to follow the commands of Moses, that was written, the law of Moses, and to continue to do what's right in God's eyes. We've seen this over and over. He says, be strong and courageous. Somebody remember when we heard that before. He tells them, be strong and courageous, and he tells them not to turn away from God. There'll be other gods out there, but keep your eyes on God. Keep God as your God, for he's your one and only God. Don't turn away from God, because if you do turn away, hey, from Brazil, thank you for tuning in from South America, in with us today in Bible study. David tells Solomon, don't turn away from God, because if you do, you violate the covenant. You violate the promise that we had, the contract essentially that they have with God says, if you serve me and trust me, then I will take care of you. But if you turn from me, then I will remove my hand from you. If you remember throughout the book of Judges, we saw this pattern. You remember it was called the Deuteronomic pattern that we see over and over, where the people serve God, he blesses them. Then they turn away from God and stuff happens to them. They get overtaken by their enemies. They have to fight battles and they lose. Then they fall away. Then they repent again, turn back to God, ask God to remember them. And then God comes back, gives them what they need, helps them in battle, strengthens them, and then they fell in the same pattern over and over. So David is encouraging Solomon, don't let that happen to you. Make sure you stay in the ways of the Lord. Follow my footsteps. Do what I've done. I've tried my best to walk blamelessly before God. Do what I did, and God will bless you. Once again, this is another theme we've seen throughout these books of the history so far with the Deuteronomic historian. We've seen these speeches over and over. You'll remember Joshua's farewell speech. He says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. He tells them that you must serve the Lord, encourages them, don't fall away. Do what God has instructed you to do. We see it again with Samuel when he encourages the people to stay strong, to stay steadfast, doing what God has instructed you to do. Now we see it with David giving these words to Solomon. It's a pattern we see over and over. David not only instructs him to stay strong in the ways of the Lord, but he also gives him an interesting command. He tells him to remember what happened with Joab and Shimei. Remember what they did to me. David says, remember what they did to me. Joab killed innocent people during peacetime, so their blood is on their hands. Shimei taunted me as I ran, as I was escaping when Absalom was on my trails. Then when I came back, he tried to act like he was my best friend. David says, remember them and don't let them rest peacefully for what they did. You guys may remember we talked about this theme before when David took over power and he had to clean up some stuff. We talked about how this resembled the Godfather 1. This is even more resemblance of the Godfather 1. On his deathbed, David is telling his son to take out the people who did him wrong. If you remember in The Godfather, when Vito was on his deathbed, they were sitting outside, out in the garden, and he's having a conversation with Michael, telling Michael all the things to watch out for and how to devise a plan to take care and take out everybody who did wrong to his father, did wrong to Vito. And once Vito died, Michael carried out the plan and executed everybody who did something wrong against his father, did something wrong against the Corleone family. I think I need to sit down and watch Godfather again. It's such a good movie. You can't watch it enough. So we see this again. David is instructing Solomon, be strong in the ways of the Lord, but also don't let these people rest peacefully because they did me wrong. So we see that again. So David, after this speech, a little time might have passed, David dies and David's buried, and now Solomon is clearly the king of Israel. He's following the footsteps. This is the first time we have seen in the monarchy a transition of power that happened in the same family line. Remember, we even go back to the last judge, Samuel. Samuel installed his sons as judges. First time a judge installed his own family as judges. But his sons did not walk blamelessly before the Lord. So his sons were not able to lead. The elders needed somebody else who would do right, and they asked for a king. Saul took over. But after Saul died, his son tried to have the king, but David came along, and David took the throne. So David was king. Now when David dies, now for the first time, David's son is placed to follow his father on the throne. And now we have a succession of power in the same family line, and a succession of power from unified kingdom to unified kingdom. There are no splits, there's no splinters. David reigned for the last 33 years over the unified kingdom. Solomon is installed as king over the unified kingdom. That's all 12 tribes, all the territories under one King one leader. So this is a key thing to see, that this is the first foreshadowing and only time we see a transition from unified monarchy and the unified kingdom from one king to the next. This is the first time we see it in the family line, first and only. So this is something that we make sure you understand. If there's ever biblical trivia, you know the only time that the king of Israel passed his throne on to his son with all 12 tribes and the unified king was David to Solomon, because we never see this again. So just file that away. We'll talk more about that next week. So Solomon has now been installed king. First thing he does, Adonijah, his brother who tried to take over the king, wants one of his father's concubines. He said, no, you ain't going to get that. Because you remember with Absalom, if someone in the land slept with the king's wives or concubines, they were seen as the king. So when Absalom went back and slept with his father's wives, that was a political move because everybody saw him as king. So when Adonijah tries to take one of his father David's concubines, the one that they sent to David when they knew he was old and wasn't going to recover no more, and when he goes through Bathsheba, Solomon says, no, that's not going to happen. And you know what? We got to get rid of Adonijah because he's still trying to take me down. So Adonijah is killed. Joab is killed, holding on to the altar. Joab is taken out in the temple. And Shimei is killed when he first gets a pass. Then he decides that he wants to leave the place he was told not to leave, across the Kidron Valley, and Solomon has him killed. So now all the enemies are gone. Everybody who was in opposition in some way, shape, or form to Solomon coming to the throne has now been taken out, and Solomon is able to lead as the king. So as he's king, he goes to sacrifice up on Gibeon. And up there, that's the highest place in Israel, he falls asleep and has a dream. And in the dream, he has an encounter with God. And God comes to him, acknowledging him as king, and asks him, what is it that you want? I will give you whatever you want. Just tell me what it is. And Solomon, who is wise, we already know, Solomon says, I'm the king of the unified tribes. All 12 tribes are under me. They have different practices. They have different ways. They're different cultures. They do things differently, and I have to lead them all. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I don't know how I'm going to handle these situations. And he asks for discernment in all things. And God says, well, since you didn't ask for material things, since you didn't ask for something to make you great with a physical possession, you didn't ask for your name to be known forever, you didn't ask to have wealth, you didn't ask to have prosperity, but you asked for discernment. And because of that, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to make you wise and give you a discerning heart. But on top of that, I'm going to give you wealth. And I'm going to make everybody know you and nobody be greater than you while you're alive. So you're going to be the man while you're alive because when I came to you and opened up everything and asked, what is it that you want? You said you wanted wisdom so that you could better do the job and carry out the assignment that I placed you in. That's so key. Now I'm going to say that again. When God came to him, he said, what is it that you want? And Solomon's response was, I want discernment so I can better do what you've placed me here to do. So often, many of us know we would ask for money, we would ask for a house, we would ask for a car. But maybe, just maybe, we need to ask God for discernment. Ask God for wisdom so that in the situations we're in, we can better do the job we were placed here to do. And in doing that, God will allow us to have the abundance and the overflow and to have the desires of our hearts. So God blesses him not just with wisdom, but God blesses him with material possessions, with wealth. He becomes what's commonly referred to in folklore as the greatest king to ever live. The most wealthy king that the world has ever seen was King Solomon. And asking for wisdom, God blessed him with so much more. So Solomon becomes the king. He leads all the unified tribes. And Solomon does something interesting. We'll talk about how it helps and how it starts to lay some seeds. Solomon installs 12 governors to help him out, to run things, to handle disputes, to be the leaders in those areas, and also to bring resources into his palace for 1 month a year. So these 12 governors are not placed with the 12 tribes. Critical distinction. I want you guys to make sure you get this. He places 12 governors, but these 12 governors are not placed in the land that each tribe received. They are placed at strategic points throughout the empire that he deems necessary. That's great that we have governors now. You remember Absalom made that idea that he would be a governor so that he could handle disputes and people wouldn't have to travel all the way down to his father. But these 12 governors have a unique role. Though they're there to kind of handle the area, these 12 governors are also there to collect resources so that all the 12 areas, each division to say, has 1 month where they're responsible for supplying food and resources for the king's palace. I don't think somebody got that. Let me say it again. These 12 areas, each month, are responsible for supplying resources for the king. We start to see something that sounds a little strange. Now, people from all over have to give of their stuff for the king. First seed. That's the first seed that we start seeing in this ground. It's going to start sprouting, but we need to sow this seed now. That he's got people and their responsibilities. 1 month, they got to give him. So if he's going to get food, he's going to get produce, he's going to get whatever. It comes from one of these 12 divisions. And the governor is making sure that this division sends in their bounty, sends in what it is, their assessment. But in order to do that, I'm sure the governors had to have some interesting ruling techniques in order to get people to give of their stuff in order for the king to eat. It's a word that we use pretty often called taxation. In order to get people to give of their stuff, taxes are applied in our culture in the United States and all over the world. Is that when the residents of an area give a percentage of what they have so that it can go to the government. In order for Solomon to have what he needed in his palace, these people, this is a little itty bitty tax that each division has. So, and what does everybody say about taxes? Everybody hates paying taxes. No matter who you are, nobody likes to pay taxes because it's money that you have to give. It's something of yours that you have to give up. If you know you hate tax, just tap the screen. I want to make sure y'all being real with me today. Nobody likes to see that them taxes come out when you get your pay stub every week or every other week, or when you get file your taxes and the government tell you that you owe. So yeah, we want to make sure we looking at the story how it really is, because they had to give of their stuff for the king. Once a month, everybody had a month of the year that they had to give. So that's the first seed that's been sold. But Solomon also has on his heart, as we saw it on David's heart, to build a temple to the Lord. David prayed to God that after the ark was returned, David's in his palace and realizes that God's temple, the Ark of the Covenant is in a tent. I'm in a palace. So I want to build a house for the Lord. So David prayed to God and began the process of building a temple, doing all the pre-work, figuring out what we needed, getting the elements, all that stuff. But David had some issues with Bathsheba. And after David's issues with Bathsheba, it snowballed from there. Because though God forgave him for it, there were consequences for his actions. So his house was always in turmoil. So the time never presented itself for David to get the opportunity to build the temple. But Solomon, his son, follows in his footsteps. And Solomon, after he has killed off Adonijah, after he's killed off Joab and Shimei, Solomon has relative peace. And Solomon is able to now shift focus to building the temple. So Solomon begins the work. He makes deals with foreign leaders to get resources to bring in so that God's temple has the best, has everything that it needs. But in order to build a building, Solomon needs workers. So Solomon begins to impose forced labor on Israel. Many of the Israelites have to work to build the temple. Now you're saying, well, it's the temple, so everybody should do their part in building the temple. Yes, that is partially true. But forced labor is forced labor. And we must understand that nobody wants to be forced to labor, because You may remember in the history of the Israelites, there was a time in their past where they had forced labor forced upon them. When they were in Egyptian captivity, they were forced to do work, to build great monuments, to build great structures for the government, for Pharaoh. Now they are free from captivity. They're in the promised land, been here for 480 years. But now the king that they asked for, remember they asked for a monarch. They asked for a king like other nations have. Sometimes it's not good to want what you see other people have because it has consequences that you may not know about. That's a sermon for another time, not for Bible study today. So Solomon imposed forced labor. You'll see other words used for it, but you'll see conscripted, which is basically unpaid, which is essentially forced labor. It's not a volunteer labor force. Conscripted means unpaid, which means they were demanded and required to work on building the temple. So for 7 years, they work on building the temple. Resources come in from Africa, from other parts of the world. Stuff comes in, whether it's stuff to make God's temple so ornate and over the top, because it is God's temple. So it should have the best of everything. God's temple should always have the best of everything. I'm a firm believer of that if we are building a structure, though this structure is not an idol to our God, this structure represents our feelings towards our God. And if we feel that God is the best thing that's ever happened to us, we should do the best for God. So they are doing their best to be building this structure so that it's ornate, so it's beautiful, so it's huge, because this is the place where they will worship their God. And their God means so much to them. They know that he demands the best. So they do their best, but they have to bring in stuff from all over. And in order to get these resources, it costs money. Now, it was not necessarily you pay $100 and you get this. It's not necessarily an even exchange, but there's a cost for everything. For some of the resources they got, they had to give up land. For other things, it's labor. They had to go bring it in. They had to do the work to build the temple. And for 7 years, they do the work to build this temple to the Lord. And after 7 years, the temple is completed. God has blessed them to build this structure for him. God gave Solomon an assurance that he was on the right track. If you have your Bibles, I encourage you to write this down. It's First Kings chapter 6, verse 11. God gives him the instruction. God lets him know that he's on his side. He says, just as I was with your father, I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to establish you. You just walk in my ways. We see this Deuteronomic theme over and over. It's a motif the Deuteronomic historian continues to use to remind us that if we do what God called us to do, we stay following his path, he'll bless us. But if we turn from it, there are consequences to pay. Somebody remembers a key thing I reminded you, that the Deuteronomic historian was written to those in exile. Always keep that in the back of your mind when you're reading through this and seeing why there's such. That's chapter 6, verse 11 of 1 Kings. Chapter 6, verse 11 of 1 Kings. So remember that as you're constantly reading through. There's so much mention to what happens if you turn away from God. That's because this was written in the exile. If you don't know what the exile is, stay with us. We'll get there and you'll understand what we're talking about. So 7 years to complete it. Then once it's done, Solomon leads a week-long celebration to dedicate the temple to the Lord. And the climax of this celebration is the Ark of the Covenant is taken from the tent of meeting and brought into the temple and is placed in the most holy place in the temple, the inner sanctuary. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is placed. Remember, the Ark of the Covenant represents God's presence. So wherever the Ark of the Covenant was seen to be, that's where the presence of the Lord was. You remember when David went to bring back the Ark of the Covenant, they stopped off because some other touched it and died. So they were saying, okay, we need to sit this down, regroup. And they put it in Obed-Edom's house. And in Obed-Edom's house, that's when God began to pour out blessings that he didn't have room enough to receive. Because where the presence of the Lord is, there's so many blessings, there's so much freedom, so much liberation. God will bless you where his presence is. And that was the physical representation of God's presence. So the temple, the Ark of the Covenant rather, is taken out of the tent of meeting and brought into the temple and placed in the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, the place where God's presence resided because the Ark of the Covenant was there. So now, and then after they brought the Ark in, they've had great celebration. They've been sacrificing. So numerous were the sacrifices that they could not even count them. Solomon gives a speech or a prayer, whatever you want to look at it. It's another one of these motifs we see from the Deuteronomic historian, where now he's admonishing the people to, one, remember what God has done for them. Remember to keep his ways and his commands, asking God to renew his covenant with them, and reminding the people that we don't turn away from God or there are consequences to pay. Once again, it's another motif we see in this Deuteronomic historian that is reminding the people to stay with God. Do what God called you to do. Make sure you don't turn your back on God. Remember, this is written to those in exile. So we keep seeing this over and over because the Deuteronomic historian wants us to see that if you follow God's commands, you'll be all right. But if you turn from God, that's when consequences will come to you. And that's only when consequences will come to you. God's not going to send them to you if you're doing right. But as soon as you're doing wrong, when God will give you grace, God will allow you to get away with it for a little while. But God says, no, if you don't turn your heart back to me, there are consequences to pay. So Solomon, great leader, he has led the people in the construction of the temple of the Lord. For the first time since they've come into the promised land, they now have a structure to worship their God. That's representative of the God that's brought them through captivity. Now we are 487 years after the Exodus, after they've come through, crossed the Jordan, crossed the Red Sea. They were in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they've come across the Jordan. They've entered into the promised land, and now God has a home where all of Israel can come to worship, to sacrifice, to pray, and to encounter God. So you're saying, well, yes, Solomon was great. Solomon built the temple. He's a great king. But as we've always seen, no matter how much great stuff you do, because of sin, we're going to always mess up. That sin concept we talked about back in Genesis, back in October, is still rearing its ugly head. Solomon's on top of the world. He's the wisest man. But even when you have wisdom, you still mess up. And even when you have wisdom, you still sin. So I'm going to speed through this because I want to make sure we want to finish up Solomon. So Solomon, as he's going around, he's a great king, he's strong, he's wise, he's made all these deals, he's gotten resources from all over the world. But in doing so, he has many wives. Many wives is not just saying that he just had a whole bunch of women or he's a womanizer. No, these are political marriages. That he goes to a place, he needs something from there, so he marries the princess, or he marries somebody a woman that's high up in their culture or their government system. And because of that, they now have the treaty between those two nations. It's a covenant. It's a connection saying that, all right, because you married this person or you've taken this wife, we're not going to attack you. You're not going to attack us. We're going to give you what you need. You're going to give us what we need. And he's done that. He has over 1,000 or so wives and concubines combined. Wow, that's a lot. But, of course, those wives and concubines aren't all Jews. They aren't all children of Israel that believe in Yahweh, the one and only God. So, when Solomon begins to open up his life to these wives and concubines, they bring with them many different religions and many different religious practices. And Solomon begins to turn his heart away from God. The one sin that we keep seeing that seems to be exalted above others in speeches is don't turn away from God. And Solomon, the man who built the temple, the man who was wise, who wrote over 3,000 proverbs, who wrote 1,005 songs, takes all these wives. But in taking these wives, his heart gets soft, and he lets them serve their gods, even in Jerusalem. And then before you know it, his heart starts turning away slightly from God. But remember, God don't want you to be lukewarm. You got to be all in this thing. You serve God and only God. Serve me and no others. He don't say serve me and you can have another one on the side. No, God says Serve me and no others. I am the only God, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. You can have no other gods before me, besides me, in place of me. I'm the only one. But Solomon takes these wives, and in taking these wives, he's exposed to these new religious practices. And over time, he begins to open up his heart to new religious understanding. And God is furious. God comes to him and says, Solomon, I told you don't do this, and you did it. So now you got to pay the consequence for it. But because I loved your father so much, because I loved him, I won't do it during your lifetime. But the kingdom is now going to be torn away. No longer is it going to be the unified northern and southern kingdoms, but it's going to be torn away because you turned away from me. Solomon was great. Solomon was wise, but Solomon turned away from God. And as I stress this theme over and over, no matter who you read about in the Bible, there's only one character who didn't do wrong. His name is Jesus Christ. We're going to get to him when we get to the New Testament. But every other character we read about in the Bible, no matter how great they were, no matter how wise they were, no matter how much stuff they did right, they always did something wrong. So that's something. So this is for each and every one of us. Don't beat yourself up because you did something wrong. Don't fight over it. Don't say God's never going to use me. God's never going to bless me. No, everybody in the Bible, save Jesus, except Jesus, did something wrong. So no matter how great they look, they did something wrong. So don't disqualify yourself. You can read the Bible and see other people who did stuff wrong just like you. Solomon prayed for wisdom, and he turns his heart away from God. He prayed for wisdom, but he wasn't wise enough not to allow these wives, whether it was political marriages, whether it was romantic, whatever. He didn't have enough wisdom to say, I'm not going to allow your religion to influence the place that God has in my life. And because of it, the lineage, he prayed for God to establish him as the rightful heir to his father, to establish a seat on the throne forever from the line of David. But God says, because you turned away from me, I'm going to split the kingdoms up. So no longer, never again, will there be a king who sits unified over all of Israel. And God raises up some adversaries for Solomon as he gets to these last days. He raises up adversaries for him, so he has people against him. And Solomon, after doing so many great things, after building the house of the Lord, after ruling over the unified kingdom, Solomon dies after having done wrong in the eyes of God. He has turned his heart even partially away from God. And because of it, there's a consequence that's not going to hit him, but it's going to fall on his descendants. And that's where we're going to stop off today. As you can see, there's so many twists and turns as we study the Bible. So many things, for so long, if you don't study it, you don't really understand it, and you think it's one way, but then when you really begin to study it, you see that it's not exactly how you may have always thought it. But in studying it and understanding it, you see how you can see yourself in the stories. Because, like I said, there's nobody perfect. The only perfect person in the 66 books of this Bible, only perfect person in these 66 books is a man by the name of Jesus Christ. He's the only one. Everybody else did something wrong. And in studying it, we began to see how in our lives, even when we do things wrong, God still can bless us. So I hope this session today blessed you on King Solomon. We're going to pick up next week, right, looking at Rehoboam and Jeroboam, Solomon's sons, and what happens after Solomon dies. Remember, I teased it with you. Solomon is the first king to take power in a peaceful succession of power and through a dynasty, a family line in the unified kingdoms. Solomon's the first, but he's also the only. There's only one time in the Bible we see transition of power over the unified kingdoms from father to son. And that was from David to Solomon. Because after Solomon dies, everything's about to get, there's a foreshadowing, everything's about to get ripped up. Somebody will catch that when you do the reading this week. So I encourage you to read through, keep on reading through 1 Kings, peruse through it, you'll see a little bit, reading through the story of Solomon. We'll talk more about Solomon and we'll look at it from a different approach when we get to the works of the chronicler. But this is the Deuteronomic historian for now, so we're seeing it in the more traditional understanding. A lot of us have been exposed to the understandings and things we'll see and exposed to in the books of Kings. So if this blessed you today, I just send an emoji with a hand up. praying hands, clapping hands, thumbs up. Let's send some emojis, get some emojis going in here, and send up some hearts if you're blessed. I'm really having a good time with these Bible studies because, as I've shared it so many times, I get to learn more each week preparing. You know, I have a degree. I have a bachelor's with a minor in religion. I have a master's, my master's of divinity. But even studying and week in and week out, I'm learning more things because every time you open up the Bible, you will learn something new. You will gain new understanding, and God will give you fresh revelation. He will let you read something you've read time and time again and have a new understanding of what he is saying in that specific passage at that specific time. So I encourage you to continue to read through it, travel with us. We're having fun. We're going to keep on going right on through the Bible because God is using this medium, using this opportunity to bless lives and help people understand who he is. So once again, stay connected to our Facebook page, facebook.com/groups/MPBCMM. If you ain't write down what I just said, click on my picture, click the Facebook link right in my bio. This Friday, we're going to try probably towards the end of this week or so, we're going to be sending out some information for a special fellowship event we have. This just for the millennials. So we love everybody who watches on Periscope, but this is just the millennials and new psalmists between 18 and 33 on February the 26th at 8 o'clock. We have a special fellowship. The information will be coming out by the end of this week, so make sure you stay tuned. But thank you guys for joining in with us. Share the replay. Let everybody know that they need to be a part of this Bible study. Even somebody who has a whole lot of Bible knowledge. Tell them it's great at times to go back to the basics. Shore up your foundation so that you make sure you're strong and you're able to do everything that God called you to do. So hope to see you guys next week. Connect with me on social media. Talk with you guys. I'm going to the Facebook page right now. I'm going to send out some questions. I want to hear from you guys. If you are blessed, we're going to keep the conversation going there as we continue to study together. So until next week, be blessed. Talk to y'all soon.